For 15 long years, the man prepared a bloody revenge, only to end up taking it out on the wrong person. The case is complicated but still interesting, involving a medical and social expert commission and fake disability certificates. In short, make yourselves comfortable, dear ones. We're about to dig into this because it's truly terrifying. On January 21, 2024 in Zaporizhzhia, a man shot a woman, and when he saw the police officers who arrived at the scene, he took his own life. The identity of the victim and the killer was established fairly quickly, but in order to determine the motives for this crime, law enforcement had to delve into a story that began back in 1999. The real names of the people involved in this story are not being disclosed, so I will refer to them by the pseudonyms used by our media. So in 1999, a man named Vladyslav was living in one of the central cities of Ukraine together with his wife, Irina. At that time, the woman held the position of head of the Regional Medical and Social Expert Commission, where a doctor named Olena worked. That same year, Olena and a nurse, Svitlana, were detained for signing documents. As a result, one of the patients received a disability group, even though he was not entitled to it. Irina, Vladislav's wife, was a witness in the case. In court, she testified against her colleagues and also said that Olena asked her to take all the blame for this crime. For this, the defendant allegedly offered Irina a monetary reward, but the woman refused to become an accomplice to the crime. Despite such discrediting testimony, in 2000 the court fully acquitted Olena, and only the nurse Svitlana was punished for the crime, and even then, the woman received only a probationary sentence. Although Olena's guilt could not be proven, the woman harbored a grudge against Irina, who repeatedly testified against her during the trial, and so she decided to take revenge on her offender. To do this, Olena prepared bottles with incendiary mixture and threw them into the window of the house where Vladyslav and Irina lived. The attempt on the couple's lives was unsuccessful. Both of them survived. But now Vladyslav was truly offended by Olena and wanted to settle the score with her in his own way. Whether the woman was actually punished for this crime and whether she really threw Molotov cocktails into the couple's window is actually unknown, but this is how the information is presented in our press, while citing their own sources in law enforcement. In short, wanting to take revenge on Olena for the attempted murder at the end of September 2000, Vladyslav hired two men who were supposed to take her life. According to the plan, the killers had to come to the victim's house, wait until she left her home, and throw a homemade explosive device disguised as a fire extinguisher at her feet. For carrying out the job, Vladyslav promised his accomplices a substantial sum, part of which he gave them immediately as an advance, and the rest he would pay after the job was done. However, the hired killers were not professionals. They went to do the job after having had quite a bit to drink. And so, let's say they were unable to carry out the plan perfectly. They threw the explosives at the house door before Olena came out, causing it to detonate early and allowing her to survive. The would-be killers were injured in the explosion and were immediately detained by law enforcement. So, the hired killers quickly broke down and gave up their client. Vladyslav, who was later arrested, refused to admit his guilt. Despite this, in 2022, the man was found guilty of incitement to murder and sentenced to 10 years in prison. The hitmen were sentenced to 8 years for attempting to murder Olena. During the trial of Vladyslav, nurse Svitlana testified against him, the same woman who, together with Olena, was involved in the case of forged disability certificates back in 1998. At the trial, Svitlana claimed that Vladyslav repeatedly threatened Olena with violence in her presence. The court considered this testimony when delivering Vladislav's verdict. So, the man ended up behind bars, and now his anger was focused not so much on Olena as on Svitlana. Olena's fate after this is unknown. But as for Svitlana, while Vladyslav was behind bars, she managed to get married and moved to the Zaporizhzhia region. The woman began a new life. So, a few years passed. Vladyslav was released a little earlier than his sentence predicted. In 2028, he officially became a free man, but by that time, thoughts of revenge had completely taken over his mind. The man started plotting revenge, this time targeting Svitlana. He did this for about 15 years, up until the middle of 2023, and in the summer of that same year, he decided to gradually start putting his plan into action. Throughout June to August, the man regularly traveled to Zaporizhzhia, each time renting the same room in a dormitory and searching for the woman he wanted to take revenge on. In September, Vladyslav started calling all the medical institutions in the city and eventually managed to determine which one employed a nurse named Svitlana. After finding out the address of the institution he needed, Vladyslav visited it every day for several more months and tracked the work schedule of his future victim. On January 21, 2024, Vladyslav, as usual, arrived at the medical institution where Mrs. Svitlana worked. To the taxi driver who brought him, the man said he needed to give something to an acquaintance and asked him to wait for him around the corner. After a while, Vladyslav returned to the car and asked to be taken to the border guard square. Once there, the man paid the taxi driver, sat down on a bench and began waiting for Svitlana. To stay discreet, Vladyslav wore a military uniform that day. Around 9 in the morning, Svitlana was returning from her night shift by bus. She got off the bus and walked toward her home. The woman's path went through a park where her future killer was actually waiting for her. Vladyslav saw Svitlana but decided to wait until she passed by him. Then he caught up with the woman and shot her in the back. The first bullet hit her torso, the second struck her in the head. One of the local residents witnessed this murder and immediately called the police.
This morning there was a shooting in the border guard square in the Oleksandrivsky district. A woman who witnessed the incident reported it to the duty unit of police department number 2. According to the woman who reported it, an unknown man shot a passing woman twice, and he's still near the scene of the crime.
While the police were on their way to the park where the murder happened, Vladyslav managed to take his victim's mobile phone and sit on a bench near the body. The reason he needed Svitlana's phone was never determined. The man didn't even try to escape or hide from the police. When the response team arrived at the park a few minutes later, Vladyslav, seeing them, shot himself in the head and died on the spot. The medics who arrived after the police tried to resuscitate Svitlana, who was still alive. However, the woman died in the ambulance before she could reach the hospital. Right after the crime, no one knew anything about Vladislav's motives or his connection to the victim. The residents of the city and law enforcement officers were shocked that the murder happened in broad daylight and in a crowded place. The head of the Zaporizhzhia Regional Military Administration, Yuri Malishko, told journalists that he would take personal control of the investigation of this case.
All operational services responded immediately at the scene, but those 2 lives can't be restored. There will be a thorough investigation. It's important to determine who put the weapon in the killer's hands, who allowed such a terrible tragedy to happen in the city center. The heads of law enforcement agencies are reporting on all the circumstances of the case, which are still being clarified. We must do all we can to prevent such tragedies from happening again.
The officers who investigated the case initially suggested 2 likely versions of the crime.
Several versions are being considered. The man who killed the local resident did not know her. Officers showed the shooter's photo to the victim's relatives, who said they didn't recognize him. From this, it can be assumed that the murder might have been spontaneous, meaning he was walking, saw the woman, and decided to kill her. The second theory suggests the murder resulted from a dispute between acquaintances.
But soon the investigators learned more about the story that preceded the crime. Thanks to this, they were able to determine the real motive of the shooter, which was revenge because Svitlana once testified against him in court. But later, Vladyslav turned out to be wrong about the victim. The woman he killed was indeed named Svitlana, but she had lived and worked in Zaporizhzhia all her life. She had never left the city, and she had never testified against a man in court. The murdered Svitlana was also not acquainted with Vladyslav himself or with any of the other people involved in the story that began in 1998. And the only thing she had in common with the Svitlana the criminal was hunting was her initials and her profession. Vladyslav, when planning his revenge, did not research the biography of the woman he intended to kill. He simply called all the hospitals, found a nurse with the initials he needed, and started shooting at her. Since the Svitlana who actually testified against Vladyslav got married soon after his arrest and took her husband's last name, her initials changed. But the criminal didn't consider this. Moreover, investigators believe that after so many years of planning his revenge, Vladyslav might have even forgotten what the woman he was so eager to get back at actually looked like. Considering that the man shot himself right after the crime, it turns out he never found out that he had taken the life of an innocent person. Well, or purely theoretically, after taking her phone, he might have seen something there that made him realize it wasn't the right person, not the right Svitlana. And that's what made him take his own life right away. We will never know that. You can write your own theories in the comments, dear ones. Anyway, thank you for watching, please take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.